Number 10. Confessions found behind fireplace bricks. A fireplace is supposed to be the heart of a room. It gives warmth, light, and the illusion of safety. Families gather around it. Conversations unfold beside it. Generations pass in front of it without imagining that its bricks might be hiding something far colder than ash. That is what makes hidden confessions so disturbing. A hearth is a place of comfort, and yet in some cases it becomes the last vault for a truth someone could not risk leaving in the open. The confession in this case became mysterious because it was not preserved like an ordinary document. It was concealed, tucked behind masonry, folded into a narrow cavity, and sealed away as if the writer believed paper alone could not protect what was written on it. That decision changes the emotional weight of everything. A diary left in a drawer can be forgotten. A confession hidden behind fireplace bricks is different. It suggests fear, urgency, and the conviction that truth would be safer inside the architecture of a house than in the hands of the people living there. That is where the unease begins. Once such a document is found, the building itself stops feeling neutral. The house is no longer just a backdrop for domestic life. It becomes an accomplice to silence. Every brick seems to belong not only to construction, but to concealment. And the confession, depending on its contents, may reshape the entire meaning of the place. Perhaps it described betrayal inside the family. Perhaps it recorded a crime, an illegitimate birth, a hidden death, a theft, or an act of violence that official records never captured. Perhaps it was less dramatic in legal terms, but more devastating in human ones. A private admission of guilt, forbidden love, cowardice, blasphemy, or ruin. What gives these discoveries such force is that they combine two timelines that were never meant to meet. On one side is the writer, alone with the knowledge they cannot safely speak aloud. On the other side is the modern discoverer, tearing into an old structure for repairs, restoration, or accident, only to find a voice preserved exactly where no one expected language to be. The distance between those moments can span decades or centuries, but when the paper is unfolded, the emotional gap collapses instantly. Someone wanted to say this. Someone wanted it hidden. And now someone else has broken the seal. Naturally, interpretation becomes unstable very quickly. A confession is not automatically a fact. It may be truthful, exaggerated, manipulative, desperate, or incomplete. The writer may have believed themselves guilty of something they did not fully understand. They may have omitted names, dates, or locations on purpose. They may have hidden the note not because it was true, but because it was dangerous to possess even as a private fantasy or accusation. Historians have to compare the text against wills, parish records, court proceedings, property transfers, letters, and oral traditions. Yet even when fragments align, the document often preserves more pain than clarity, and that is what makes the case so haunting. The confession behind the bricks is not merely a secret recovered. It is evidence of a person reaching the limit of what could be publicly endured. Instead of speaking, they built the truth into the wall and trusted time to become their witness. The fire burned in front of it. Families lived around it. Children may have played beside it. And all the while, a folded piece of paper remained close enough to touch, carrying a version of the past no one in that room was allowed to know. In the end, the discovery changes the fireplace forever. It is no longer just a domestic object. It becomes a monument to delayed speech. The house kept the secret better than the people did, and the truth survived not because it was honored, but because it was hidden so well that ordinary life kept sealing it in place. Number 9. Coins buried in door frames. A door frame seems too narrow, too practical, too ordinary to matter. It exists to hold a threshold in place, to separate inside from outside, safety from exposure, family from strangers. But history has a habit of loading ordinary boundaries with extraordinary meaning. That is why coins buried in door frames are so fascinating. A few pieces of metal pressed into timber or tucked into the structure of an entrance can transform a house from a shelter into a statement, a warning, or even a ritual device. The mystery begins with the fact that such coins were not lost in the normal sense. They were placed. Someone intentionally embedded them into the threshold of a building, often where no one was meant to see them again. That alone raises difficult questions. Were they offerings for luck, prosperity, and protection? Were they payment in symbolic form, dedicating the house to a saint, a custom, or a local belief? Were they charms against illness, fire, witchcraft, or evil entering through the most vulnerable point of the home? Or were they markers of ownership, dates, or identity meant for the structure itself rather than for the people passing through it? What makes these finds so powerful is their location. A threshold is never just wood and nails. In almost every culture, it is psychologically charged. It is the place where outsiders become guests, where danger may cross over, where marriage, mourning, labor, and ritual all physically pass. To place coins, there is to treat the doorway almost like a living border. The house is not simply built. It is initiated. And once that possibility is understood, the buried coins stop looking like spare change hidden in construction. They start looking like a ceremony frozen inside the frame. Of course, the problem is that intention rarely survives as clearly as the act itself. The coins may carry dates that help place the building, but not explain the motive. They may belong to a ruler, a reign, or a circulation pattern, but that still leaves open whether they were chosen for value, symbolism, convenience, or superstition. A single coin could be accidental. Several coins arranged deliberately in the same part of the doorway are harder to dismiss. But even then, interpretation remains unstable. What one generation treated as protection, another might regard as habit. What a builder did for custom, a later owner might repeat without remembering why. That is why investigators have to look beyond the coins themselves. They study local building traditions, folklore, parish customs, household rituals, and the archaeology of domestic spaces. They ask whether similar deposits appear in chimneys, foundations, roof beams, or beneath hearthstones. They compare denominations, wear patterns, dates, and positioning. Were the coins hidden at construction, during renovation, or in response to crisis? Were they inserted during plague years, after a fire, at the birth of a child, or when ownership changed hands? The deeper the context grows, the more the doorway starts to resemble a site of private ritual rather than mere carpentry. And yet something still resists full explanation. Coins are among the most ordinary artifacts in human history. They pass through countless hands, carrying markets, empires, rulers, taxes, and daily survival. But once hidden inside a doorframe, they leave the world of exchange entirely. They are no longer meant to circulate. They are retired from economy and reassigned to memory, fear, or protection. That transition is what makes them so eerie. The coin remains familiar, but its purpose becomes hidden, almost devotional. In the end, coins buried in doorframes reveal how much history can be concealed inside the smallest acts of ordinary architecture. A person building or repairing a home may have believed they were doing more than securing wood. They may have been sealing the boundary between visible life and invisible danger. And centuries later, when the frame is opened and the coins fall out, the house seems to confess that it was never only a house. It was also a vessel for beliefs its occupants no longer knew how to name. Number 8. Manuscripts used as binding waste. A book is supposed to preserve words, not destroy them. That is what makes binding waste one of the strangest and most unsettling forms of historical survival. In countless old volumes, fragments of earlier manuscripts were cut apart and reused inside bindings, pasted into spines, folded into covers, or hidden as structural material. Pages once copied with care were reduced to reinforcement. Sacred texts, legal records, songs, letters, chronicles, and scholarly notes were treated not as voices worth preserving, but as useful scraps. That reversal is what gives the mystery its power. A manuscript fragment found inside a later binding is not simply old paper. It is evidence of two different ages colliding. The first age created the text because it mattered. The second age dismantled it because it no longer seemed to matter enough. And the modern age, opening the book centuries later, suddenly realizes that what looked like a sturdy cover may be hiding the remains of an erased intellectual world. The case becomes even darker when the fragment is clearly valuable in retrospect. A lost saint's life, a local chronicle from a vanished monastery, a legal formula from a region whose records were mostly destroyed, a rare vernacular poem surviving nowhere else. The text endured, but only because someone stopped caring about it in the way its maker once did. That means survival arrived through desecration. The page was saved not by reverence, but by reuse. It lived because it was cut down into something ordinary. What makes these discoveries so exciting to scholars is that binding waste often preserves exactly the kind of material official archives failed to protect. Fragile working texts, regional writings, liturgical variants, administrative drafts, and non-prestigious documents can vanish almost completely from the formal record. But once in a while, a binder accidentally turns one of them into a hidden time capsule. A strip of parchment in a spine may preserve a script otherwise unknown from that place and century. A paste down inside a cover may contain a date, a name, or a phrase that reorders what historians thought they knew. And yet there is always something tragic in the recovery. The fragment is rarely intact. Lines are trimmed away, margins are gone, names disappear into folds. Ink is rubbed down by pressure, glue, and wear. Sometimes the only way to read the text is to dismantle the later book that preserved it, forcing modern conservators into a moral tension of their own. To rescue the older voice, do they damage the later artifact? To protect the later binding, do they leave the older text partly trapped forever? The archive becomes a battlefield between two survivals. That tension is why binding waste feels so perfect for hidden archives. It captures a terrifying truth about history. Loss is not always clean. The past is not only destroyed or preserved, it is often transformed into something else. A manuscript can become packaging, support, lining, or filler, and in that altered state it may survive better than texts that were left alone. The hidden fragment becomes a witness to the indifference of one era and the hunger of another. In the end, manuscripts used as binding waste reveal that knowledge can endure in the most humiliating forms. A text someone once copied with devotion may spend centuries crushed inside a cover, unread and unnamed, until a restorer notices a line of script where no script should be. And in that moment, the book stops being one book. It becomes two histories layered together, the volume that was meant to survive and the one that survived by being sacrificed. Number 7. Bones, hidden in monastery wells. Wells are meant to give life. They provide water, continuity, and the practical rhythm of survival. In a monastery, a well seems especially ordinary, almost peaceful, part of a cloistered world, structured around prayer, work, routine, and restraint. That is what makes hidden bones in monastery wells so disturbing. The discovery turns a source of nourishment into a chamber of silence and forces an immediate question no one wants to ask. How did human remains end up in one of the most controlled spaces of religious life? The mystery deepens because such bones rarely feel accidental. A body lost in a battlefield or plague pit enters the earth through visible catastrophe. Bones in a monastery well suggest something narrower, more concealed, and potentially more intimate. Someone placed them there or allowed them to remain there, in a place where disposal would almost certainly have been noticed. That alone changes the emotional temperature of the site. The monastery stops feeling like a sanctuary and starts feeling like a structure capable of absorbing secrets into its own infrastructure. Naturally, explanations compete. Some are practical. Wells can be abandoned, repurposed, or used in moments of crisis when normal burial practices break down. War, famine, epidemic, or siege can collapse ordinary order. In those circumstances, the well may become not a ritual space, but a desperate one. Yet even that does not remove the unease. Religious houses were places of regulation. Bodies mattered, burial mattered, memory mattered. If remains were hidden there, then some failure, or some act of concealment, intervened between death and the formal order that should have followed. That is why investigators examine everything. The age and sex of the dead, signs of trauma, cut marks, disease, the number of individuals, whether the bones were deposited all at once or over time, whether they belonged to monks, labourers, children, women, outsiders, or a mix that should not logically be there. They study the well itself for layers of fill, collapsed stone, discarded objects, and changes in use. Sometimes the remains point toward violence, sometimes toward clandestine burial, sometimes toward the slow accumulation of disturbed graves and later confusion. But even when a plausible explanation appears, the emotional force remains. The well was turned into a hidden archive of death. And there is something especially haunting about the monastic setting. Monasteries were record-making institutions. They copied texts, preserved names, marked feasts, kept accounts, and often maintained some version of memorial continuity. A hidden deposit of bones, then, can feel like a contradiction built into the very idea of the place. Here is a community dedicated to prayer and remembrance, yet within its boundaries lie human remains, not clearly named, not clearly honoured, and perhaps intentionally removed from ordinary memory. The silence becomes theological as well as historical. In some cases, the bones may expose darker realities that official records softened or omitted. Internal discipline turned violent, conflict with locals, bodies concealed during political upheaval, illicit burials that could not be publicly acknowledged. The dead become evidence of the distance between institutional self-image and lived reality. A monastery may present itself in chronicles as ordered, devout, and stable, while the well below preserves proof of fear, secrecy, or breakdown. That is what makes the case so powerful. Wells already carry symbolic weight in history, depth, reflection, purity, danger, hidden things below the surface. When bones emerge from one, especially in a religious setting, the image is almost too perfect. The ground itself seems to reject the concealment. What was thrown down in silence rises back up, demanding interpretation. In the end, bones hidden in monastery wells remind us that some of history's darkest records were never written down at all. They were dropped into places no one expected to read. And when those places are opened, the discovery does more than reveal death. It reveals the possibility that beneath even the most disciplined surfaces of the past, entire human stories were being deliberately kept out of sight. Number 6. Relics found in foundation stones. A foundation stone is supposed to mark certainty. It sits at the beginning of a structure, the point where intention becomes weight, where a building first announces that it is meant to endure. Churches, houses, towers, civic halls, and monasteries all rely on foundations to disappear from view while carrying everything above them. That is what makes hidden relics in foundation stones so unsettling. The most stable part of a building suddenly becomes the place where secrecy begins. The mystery starts with the act itself. Relics placed inside a foundation were not lost by accident. They were embedded. Someone deliberately chose to bury an object at the moment of construction, sealing it into the body of the building before walls rose and daily life covered the act. That instantly raises difficult questions. Was the relic meant as protection, blessing, consecration, or power? Was it there to sanctify the space, to guard it from collapse, disease, fire, or hostile forces? Or was it something more troubling, a political statement, a claim of ownership, a warning, or a symbolic attempt to bind the identity of the structure to a sacred past? What gives these finds such historical power is that foundation deposits exist on the border between ritual and concealment. On one level, they may be official. Builders, clergy, or patrons often understood the symbolic importance of beginning a structure under divine protection. But on another level, once the object is enclosed, it disappears from ordinary memory. Generations may worship, live, work, or govern above it without knowing what lies beneath their feet. The ritual survives physically, but not consciously. The building keeps the memory even when the community no longer does. That is where interpretation becomes unstable. A relic in a foundation may be exactly what it claims to be, or it may be something far stranger. A saint's fragment might be authentic, misidentified, substituted, or invented for local prestige. A coin, amulet, bone, cross, inscribed tablet, or miniature reliquary may belong to a formal consecration rite, or to a private act by a fearful builder who wanted extra protection beyond official ceremony. The closer historians look, the less obvious the line becomes between sanctioned devotion and buried anxiety. Investigators have to read both the object and the structure around it. They study when the building was erected, who paid for it, what conflicts marked the period, and whether similar deposits appear elsewhere in the region. They ask whether the relic was placed at original construction or during repair after disaster. Was the building founded during plague, political upheaval, war, reform, or contested rule? If so, the object beneath the stone may reveal not just piety, but panic. Foundations laid in unstable times often carry the emotional pressure of those who feared that stone alone would not be enough. And then there is the darker possibility, that the relic was not merely meant to bless the building, but to legitimize it. Sacred fragments can create authority. A church standing above a relic claims spiritual significance. A ruler building over one claims continuity with sanctity. A monastery or shrine can attract pilgrims, donations, influence, and protection if the hidden object beneath it is believed to connect the place to a holy past. In that sense, a relic under a foundation does not just support a building symbolically, it supports the institution's right to exist and command belief. That is why these discoveries feel so charged. They remind us that buildings are never only functional. They are arguments made in stone. And when a hidden relic is found at the base, the argument changes. What looked like architecture becomes ritualized memory. What looked like a public monument may also have been a sealed negotiation with fear, divine favor, or historical legitimacy. In the end, relics found in foundation stones reveal that some of the past's most revealing secrets were hidden at the very moment permanence was being created. The building rose above ground for all to see, but the deeper truth of why it was built, and what its makers hoped would protect it, was buried before the first wall ever reached the light. Number 5, writings beneath layers of old paint. A wall painting, portrait, or decorative panel seems to present a finished surface. We are meant to see what is visible and accept that as the final statement. That is what makes hidden writing beneath old paint so unnerving. The surface begins to look less like an image and more like a mask. And once conservators discover words trapped underneath, the artwork stops being a single object. It becomes a layered crime scene of memory, revision, and silence. The mystery begins with concealment. These writings were not meant to remain readable. Someone painted over them. That act alone carries enormous historical weight because painting over text is never neutral. It suggests correction, censorship, repurposing, embarrassment, politics, devotion, fear, or simply the practical reuse of a space. But once the writing resurfaces, the old surface can no longer be trusted as complete. The visible layer becomes only the most recent decision in a much longer argument. What lies underneath can vary wildly, and that unpredictability is part of the fascination. A forgotten inscription naming the original patron of a building, a political slogan buried after a change in regime, a devotional text covered during reform, a a personal note from an artist or labourer who never expected posterity to find it, a merchant's ledger line reused in a panel, a previous image with labels from an earlier age. The deeper investigators go, the more they realize the object has lived multiple lives, each one trying to suppress or overwrite the last. That is why these discoveries are so powerful for historians. Writing beneath paint does not just add information, it exposes process. It reveals that the object we inherited was shaped by selective forgetting. The finished work was not necessarily the original truth. It may be the result of erasure. And in some cases, the underlying text can alter the meaning of the visible image so drastically that the entire object must be reinterpreted. A portrait becomes propaganda, a devotional scene becomes evidence of conflict, a decorative wall becomes a buried archive of local crisis. The methods used to uncover such hidden text almost intensify the atmosphere of the mystery. Infrared reflectography, raking light, multispectral imaging, X-rays, pigment analysis, and painstaking conservation all allow scholars to look through the surface without immediately destroying it. That process feels almost supernatural in its effect. Words that no human eye has seen for centuries begin to glow back into visibility. The object appears to confess against its own will, revealing that the silence imposed on it was never absolute. Yet interpretation remains dangerous. An inscription can be fragmented, partially scraped away, or distorted by later damage. Paint layers may shift the apparent order of events. A word that seems definitive may belong to a different composition, a reused support, or an earlier restoration. And even when the text is real and legible, motive is harder to recover. Was it hidden to protect someone or to erase them? Was the covering act ideological, aesthetic, devotional, or financial? Did those responsible believe they were destroying the older message, or simply moving on from something they no longer considered important? That ambiguity is what gives the case its haunting quality. Writing beneath paint feels like thought refusing to die. It survives not in the open, but in suspension. Present, legible in theory, but trapped under a later surface until technology or accident makes it breathe again. The hidden words become the ghost beneath the image, evidence that history often survives best when it is not fully removed, only buried under something more acceptable. In the end, writings beneath layers of old paint reveal that many historical objects are not singular at all. They are stacked decisions, each one pressing down on the one before it. When the hidden text comes back into view, it does more than recover lost words. It restores conflict, memory, and intention to an object that had been pretending to be whole. Number 4. Maps hidden inside globe stands. A globe is supposed to make the world visible. It turns distance into something the hand can rotate, something the eye can master from the safety of a room. Empires, seas, coastlines, and trade routes all shrink into elegant certainty. That is what makes hidden maps inside globes stand so unsettling. The object designed to display the world may also be hiding a second geography beneath its polished surface, as if the official version was never the whole story. The mystery begins with the concealment itself. A map hidden in the stand of a globe was not misplaced. It was deliberately folded away into the very object associated with knowledge, navigation, and control. That decision changes the meaning of both things at once. The globe becomes less like an educational tool and more like a container. The hidden map becomes less like a document and more like a secret meant to travel quietly in respectable company. A cabinet piece in a scholar's room or noble household suddenly starts to look like a disguised archive. What such a map represents depends on context, and that is where the unease deepens. It might be a private route, a military sketch, a colonial claim not yet publicly declared, or a local correction to the world shown above it. It could mark resources, borders, safe passages, smuggling paths, missionary destinations, or rumoured territories too uncertain or too politically dangerous to display openly. The fact that it was hidden suggests that its contents mattered in a way ordinary geography did not. It was meant for select eyes, not for the room at large. That duality is what gives the case its power. The visible globe presents an orderly world, one mapped, categorized, and owned through knowledge. The hidden paper beneath it suggests that real power operated through quieter channels. Official geography may have been for students, visitors, and status. The concealed map may have been for insiders. One version of the world was decorative and public. The other was practical, secretive, or explosive. Investigators, of course, have to ask how and why the map got there. Was it hidden at the moment the globe was made, turning the stand into a built-in vault? Was it inserted later by an owner who needed a place no one would think to search? Did the globe belong to a scholar, merchant, naval officer, diplomat, smuggler, or collector whose work depended on keeping certain knowledge compartmentalized? Every possibility pulls the object deeper into the world of covert movement and selective access. And then there is the symbolic force of the hiding place. A globe stand is part of the structure that supports the image of the world. To hide a map inside it feels almost too perfect. The secret geography literally supports the official one. The false calm of the surface rests on something more private, more urgent, perhaps more truthful. That is why such discoveries resonate beyond curiosity. They feel like metaphors turned physical. The world people were shown may not have been the world that mattered most to those directing events. Even when the map itself is understood, interpretation rarely settles cleanly. A set of coordinates might correspond to territory no longer named the same way. Coastal outlines may reflect an earlier stage of knowledge or deliberate distortion. Symbols may refer to trade, contraband, military logistics, private estates, or coded family interests. The map may be genuine but partial, accurate in one sense and deceptive in another. Hidden documents are often designed not to clarify everything, but to preserve advantage. In the end, maps hidden inside globe stands reveal that historical knowledge was often layered by audience. One world was meant to be seen, another was meant to be carried, concealed, and perhaps acted upon by very few. And when the hidden paper finally slides out from inside the stand, the globe no longer feels like a symbol of enlightenment alone. It feels like a polished shell around a more dangerous truth. Number 3. Human remains beneath church floors. Church floors are meant to be walked on in reverence. They support prayer, ritual, confession, mourning, and communal memory. They seem stable, solemn, almost immune to surprise. That is what makes human remains beneath church floors so disturbing. The dead are not in a distant cemetery or marked crypt, but directly below the surface of ordinary devotion, beneath the feet of generations who may never have known what they were standing over. In one sense, burial inside churches is not mysterious at all. For centuries, important patrons, clergy, nobles, and benefactors were interred within sacred spaces. Yet the mystery begins when the remains do not match expectation. Bones appear where no marked grave should exist. Multiple bodies are found in locations not recorded. Fragments turn up beneath repairs, under altars, within side aisles, or under flooring far from any known memorial. The church, which should have preserved names and hierarchy, instead begins yielding anonymous dead from the fabric of the building itself. That is where unease takes over. Once remains are found beneath a church floor, the space divides into two histories. Above is the visible church, the liturgy, the architecture, the official plaques, the remembered patrons. Below is the concealed church, the bodies omitted, forgotten, displaced, or never properly acknowledged. The floor becomes less like a boundary between the living and the dead, and more like a lid over unresolved memory. The possible explanations only deepen the atmosphere. Some remains may belong to lost burials erased by renovation, fire, reform, or simple neglect. Others may reflect mass death during plague, conflict, famine, or local crisis, when sacred ground was used under pressure and record-keeping broke down. Some may have been disturbed and reburied badly during rebuilding. But in darker cases, the bones raise harsher possibilities: concealed violence, social exclusion, children or marginalized people buried without public recognition, or bodies moved to protect reputations and institutional order. That is why investigators look carefully at everything: position, layering, coffin traces, trauma, age, sex, disease, burial goods, and relationship to architectural phases. Was the person intentionally buried there or deposited later? Were the remains respected, compressed, rearranged, or discarded as part of construction? Do they align with parish registers, wills, or church accounts? And perhaps most unsettling of all, when the records are silent, is that silence accidental or chosen? Churches are archives as much as they are buildings. They preserve inscriptions, memorial traditions, sacramental records, family prestige, and official remembrance. So when unnamed remains emerge from beneath the floor, the discovery exposes a crack in that system. Someone was left out. Someone was absorbed into sacred space without stable identity. The church kept the body, but not the person's place in public memory. That contradiction gives the case its force. A site devoted to remembrance may also have perfected forgetting. There is also a physical intimacy to the mystery that makes it especially haunting. Floors are touched constantly, even if indirectly. Every procession, every kneeling worshipper, every child baptized, every coffin carried through the nave has passed above these hidden remains. The dead were never far away. They were integrated into the life of the building so completely that absence and presence became almost indistinguishable. The discovery does not add death to the church. It reveals that death was always built into its daily reality. In the end, human remains beneath church floors remind us that sacred spaces do not escape the darker habits of history. They gather them, layer them, and sometimes conceal them beneath ritual continuity so effectively that later generations mistake silence for peace. But once the floor opens, the church begins speaking in a different voice, one made not of sermons or records, but of bones that survived without permission to be remembered. Number 2. Letters found in sealed wall cavities. A wall is supposed to divide space, not store memory. It separates one room from another, one household from the weather, one private life from the outside world. That is what makes letters found in sealed wall cavities so unsettling. The wall stops behaving like architecture and starts behaving like a vault. What should have been solid and silent turns out to have been carrying a hidden conversation for decades, sometimes centuries, without anyone in the house realizing it. The mystery begins with intent. A letter inside a wall cavity was not casually misplaced. It was put there, slid between beams, tucked behind plaster, or sealed into a narrow gap where ordinary access would be almost impossible once the surface was closed. That decision immediately changes the emotional charge of the document. This was not simply correspondence left behind. It was correspondence concealed with purpose. Someone believed the safest place for words was inside the body of a building. And that raises the first difficult question: why? Perhaps the letter was hidden during war, political terror, occupation, or religious persecution. Perhaps it contained private accusations, a forbidden romance, a confession, financial desperation, a plea for help, or details that could destroy a family if discovered. In other cases, the motive may have been less dramatic, but no less haunting. A person on the edge of departure may have hidden a message they hoped someone would someday find. A builder, servant, child, prisoner, or tenant may have chosen the wall because no other archive would keep their voice safe. That is what gives such discoveries their peculiar force. Letters are intimate by nature. They carry names, hopes, grievances, and moments of living thought. When they are hidden inside a structure, that intimacy becomes fused with secrecy. The house itself begins to look complicit. Rooms once thought ordinary become charged with the possibility that daily life unfolded around trapped words no one could hear. Meals were eaten, children slept, arguments took place, generations moved through the building, and all the while a private voice remained inches away, sealed behind plaster. Investigators naturally try to reconstruct both the letter and its concealment. They examine handwriting, dates, watermarks, folds, stains, sealing methods, and the exact position where the paper was found. Was it hidden during original construction or later repair? Was it placed from inside the room or through an opening now closed off? Do the names match census records, parish entries, military lists, tenancy rolls, legal disputes, or family stories? Sometimes a single letter connects to a known event. More often it opens a door into a life that the official record barely noticed. And that is where the case becomes more unsettling, not less. The letter may tell the truth or only one frightened version of it. It may accuse without proof, confess without context, or hint at danger without naming the source. A message hidden in a wall is often shaped by urgency, not completeness. The writer may have expected no reply. They may have omitted details on purpose in case the paper was found too soon. Historians can compare, infer, and contextualize, but the essential human scene often remains just out of reach. The moment someone decided to trust the wall more than the world. That image is what lingers. A hand slipping folded paper into darkness, plaster closing over it, time sealing it deeper with dust, paint, renovation, and neglect. The house survives. The family line changes. The town modernizes. And then one day a repair breaks through the surface, and a dead voice re-enters the room with its fear still intact. In the end, letters found in sealed wall cavities reveal that history sometimes survives by abandoning any hope of being read immediately. These are not documents preserved by institutions. They are documents preserved by desperation. And when they emerge, they do more than tell us what happened. They tell us what it felt like to live in a world where truth had to be hidden inside the walls just to remain alive. Number 1. Messages hidden in coffin linings. A coffin is meant to close a life. It is the final container, the last formal boundary between the living and the dead. That is what makes hidden messages in coffin linings so deeply disturbing. The coffin stops being only a vessel for burial and becomes something else, a secret archive sent underground, a private chamber where words were placed under the protection of death itself. The mystery begins with the sheer intimacy of the hiding place. A letter beneath floorboards or behind bricks is hidden from people. A message sewn into a coffin lining is hidden from time, scandal, and ordinary correction. It suggests that whoever placed it there believed the grave offered better security than any room, drawer, box, or safe. That is a chilling thought. The dead person's final enclosure becomes the chosen location for a truth too dangerous, too sacred, too personal, or too forbidden to remain among the living. The possible motives are as unsettling as the act. Perhaps the message was a final confession placed with the deceased because it concerned them directly. Perhaps it was a declaration of love never spoken publicly, a statement about disputed parentage, a hidden prayer, a plea for forgiveness, an accusation, or instructions meant to remain secret unless the burial was disturbed. In some cases, the message may have functioned almost ritually, as if placing words with the dead gave them a different status, safer, more binding, or closer to divine judgment. The coffin lining becomes not just concealment, but transfer. What gives these discoveries such extraordinary power is the symbolic violence they do to our expectations. Burial is supposed to mark closure. The coffin is supposed to remove a person from the social tensions of ordinary life. But once a hidden message is found there, closure collapses. The burial begins to look unfinished. The dead were sent into the ground carrying unresolved knowledge. The grave no longer represents silence alone. It represents silence under pressure. And unlike many other hidden documents, coffin messages often carry a particular emotional charge because the decision to place them there was made at the edge of mortality. Whether written by the deceased, a mourner, a cleric, or someone acting in secret during preparation, the act takes place in one of the most morally intense spaces humans create. Grief, ritual, guilt, fear, and finality all converge there. A message inserted into that environment is rarely casual. It feels deliberate in the deepest possible sense, as though someone believed that only the nearness of death could protect what was being said. Investigators confronted with such a discovery have to move carefully. The material may be fragile, stained, folded into fabric, damaged by decay, or incomplete. They study thread, placement, ink, paper, handwriting, and burial context. Was the note sewn in at the time of preparation or slipped in later? Was it intended for discovery if the body was ever examined, or intended never to be found at all? Does it align with wills, family disputes, funeral customs, court records, medical reports, or religious practice? Each answer can intensify the mystery rather than settle it. Because even when the message is legible, motive may remain obscured. A confession may protect one person while condemning another. A name may appear without explanation. A plea may imply a scandal everyone else worked to suppress. The message may not tell a full story. It may preserve only the sharpest emotional edge of one. And that is often enough to destabilize an entire family history, a burial narrative, or a local memory that had seemed settled for generations. That is why this case stands at number 1. Messages hidden in coffin linings capture the darkest truth in this entire video. Some of history's most important secrets were not hidden in places of public power, but in the intimate spaces where ordinary people confronted fear, shame, love, death, and memory. The coffin is supposed to contain a body. Instead, it sometimes contains unfinished history.